Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 4 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Toronto Maple Leafs, in which the Sharks have won 5-3, and I must say, going into this game, it was the third game of a long Eastern Canada road trip in which the Sharks were on the second half of a back-to-back, playing this second game in less than 24 hours after the first one, as the Ottawa Senators game was 7 o'clock local time, and this Toronto Maple Leafs game was 6 o'clock local time. And with the Toronto Maple Leafs being a very well-rested team, haven't played in multiple days, this really felt like a game that was essentially designed for the Sharks to just lose, especially when you consider the Leafs are expected to be a playoff, not just a playoff team, but a playoff contender. And of course, the Sharks, at least coming into this season, were not really expected to do much in terms of even reaching the Stanley Cup playoffs. So the fact that the Sharks managed to win this game was incredibly impressive, I must say. And the first period started off, teams were trading blows, I guess you could say, but all in all, it was a pretty uneventful first period. Neither team managed to get on the board, and so it was a 0-0 game after 20 minutes. Nobody could have really predicted how the rest of this game ended up going. The Sharks would get the first goal. That would be Logan Couture to make it 1-0 San Jose. The Leafs would very quickly respond on just the next shift as Jason Spezza would make it 1-1, but then the Sharks would also very quickly respond on the very next shift as well by getting a goal from Timo Meyer to make it 2-1 San Jose. Soon enough, just a couple minutes later, the Leafs would manage to tie it up at 2 with an Andre Kasha breakaway goal before the Sharks would finally manage to get the lead and hold it at least until the end of the period with a Erik Karlsson goal to make it 3-2 after 40 minutes. In the third period, it started off immediately with the Sharks adding to their lead by getting a goal from Jonathan Dahlen to make it 4-2 San Jose, and they held on to this 2-goal lead for a pretty long time until it was John Tavares who got a pretty lucky goal. This one ended up being a shot from William Nylander. It goes off of Tavares' I believe his arm and then deflects into the net off of the skate of Jacob Middleton, so a pretty lucky bounce there for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but the Sharks managed to then hold down the fourth. They don't give the Leafs that elusive fourth goal in this game, and eventually Logan Couture scores the empty netter to secure the victory for the Sharks, now undefeated to start the season. That continues with a 4-0 record right at the top of the Pacific Division. Moving on to the players, as you'll have noticed if you just took a look at all the goal scores here for this game, it was once again the first line for the San Jose Sharks that had to do all of the heavy lifting in this game. Couture scored 2 goals, although one was an empty netter. Meyer scored a goal. Dahlen scored a goal. The only goal not scored by a player on the Sharks' first line this game was Erik Karlsson. So they are just absolutely carrying this team at this point. And over the first 3 games of this season, I've talked extensively about Logan Couture and Jonathan Dahlen. Couture obviously just continuing to be the best player for the San Jose Sharks maybe not by far, but the best player for the San Jose Sharks this season. And the only players close to him are his line mates, I would say, or at least one of his line mates. But I've talked about him a lot, and of course I've talked about Dahlen a lot because of the fact that he is a rookie this season, and he managed to score a goal in this game, which was very impressive. But I've also mostly just kind of mentioned Timo Meyer on the side. I've talked about how good he's been, but I haven't really discussed it at length, so I will do that at this point. Timo Meyer just looks significantly more engaged with the game than what we've seen from him in the previous 2 seasons, where he just kind of looked uninterested in how the Sharks were actually doing. And I think the biggest example of that was this one play in the second period. The first line for the San Jose Sharks, they get a very good opportunity off the rush, but it's only really a rush between Couture and Dahlen. They get a couple decent looks, but they don't manage to score. The puck then starts going the other way for the Maple Leafs, and it's only really a 2-on-2, so nothing extremely dangerous. But you see Meyer, who kind of had arrived late in the offensive zone on that Dahlen Couture rush chance. He just sprints back on the back check to get into the play and try and disrupt it. And that was something that was so missing from his game in the 2 previous years. I cannot even count how many goals over the past 2 seasons that the opposing team against the Sharks have scored, where I would then look at the replay and you would see sort of the extended view of the ice, and you could just see Timo Meyer kind of leisurely skating in the neutral zone, making absolutely zero effort to try and get back defensively. So the fact that he showed that on a play that wasn't even particularly dangerous in in terms of offensive capabilities for the Leafs shows that he absolutely is just 100% locked into this game, and he continues to just be an absolute dominant force along with his two other line mates, which are really the major reason why the San Jose Sharks are 4-0 to start this season. Because if not for this first line, these other three lines have left a lot to be desired as we move on to the second line, and nothing has really changed for this second line. Hertl had continued, I've said this so many times now, he continued to have some pretty decent defensive plays, but the offensive plays, besides maybe two shifts, I thought were not really there. Balcers was entirely invisible. You could have probably told me that Balcers did not play this game, and I would have believed you. And when it comes to William Eklund, he once again actually trailed in terms of ice time, was the lowest ice time in the entire game, even counting the Sharks' fourth liners. Now, I don't believe that was intentional from Bob Booner, and I'll actually get to the fourth line in a bit, but it is going to show that he's not necessarily being trusted a ton. It was a shift in the first period, I believe, in the Sharks defensive zone. The game was still tied at 0. There was still a ton of time left in the game, and yet it was a shift started by Hertl, Balcers, and Nick Benino because it was in the defensive zone, and for whatever reason, Booner just not trusting Eklund to be on the ice for that particular draw. And so obviously once the puck made its way out of the defensive zone, Benino went to the bench and Eklund came on the ice, but still it is showing something. So I've already said a lot about Eklund in the previous game, so if you want to know my thoughts about that, you could go watch that. So I'm not going to repeat myself here, but all I will say is that this is now the fourth game. There's still that 9-game window, and it's kind of a tick-tock situation for Eklund. On to the third line, which once again continues to be the only line that is remotely close to the Meyer, Couture, Dahlin line. I do want to talk a bit more about Nick Benino, who is also kind of holding the team together, holding them on his back, I guess you could say. He was signed during this past offseason, a 2-year deal at $2.1 million. Obviously, this was a pretty decently sized signing, but no one thought that it would be, at least I didn't think, that it would be this impactful. Nick Benino has not only just been a very solid third-line center for the San Jose Sharks so far this season, but he's just been playing a ton of ice time. He's been playing in all situations. He's on the power play, he's on the penalty kill, he's on the ice for when the Sharks are holding precarious 1-goal leads, which they have been doing against three of their 4 games this season, against the Jets, the Leafs, and the Ottawa Senators as well. And he had almost 20 minutes tonight, which was the most of any forward on the San Jose Sharks. Benino has just been this huge piece of the Sharks this season. Kevin Lebank, also a pretty decent game offensively, maybe not at the same level as it was in the previous one against the Ottawa Senators, but still looking pretty solid. And you could definitely say the same thing about Matt Nieto. If there was a line that I felt like could definitely break out at even strength coming up into the next couple of games, and I had to bet between the second, third, and fourth line, I would put my money on the third line. And that, of course, brings us to the fourth line, which was just an absolute unmitigated disaster once again here tonight. And in the previous game, I talked about, maybe you could swap out Lane Peterson, but I know they don't want to. I feel as though even with a victory here tonight, the Sharks should be making a change on this fourth line. It's just not looked good at all. They're continuously hemmed in their own zone. Both Weatherby and Peterson look completely lost when it comes to defending in their own zone. They are puck-watching machines, which is not a good thing. And essentially, this line looks like Cogliano with 2 toddlers on leashes trying to hold them around as they defend, against their lives so many times, right? There's the response goal after the Sharks' first goal of this game from Logan Couture came with the fourth line on, and it just looked completely awful as they were just run around in circles, not by the Leafs' first line. It's not as though Matthews and Marner came on the ice to just run circles around these fourth liners. The Leafs' fourth line was doing this. And I talked about back at the start of the season where I said that Doug Wilson was trying to promote the competition, that the Sharks just wanted to get a fourth line that wouldn't lose every night to the other team's fourth line. But that's exactly what happened here tonight. Spezza, Simmons, and Engvall were just significantly better than what Weatherby, Cogliano, and Peterson were bringing to the table. I know Weatherby is still a decent force, net front presence on the Sharks power play, so it is possible he can remain into the lineup going into the next game. But at this point, if Lane Peterson still finds himself in the lineup, I'd be rather surprised. Moving on to the defense, Brent Burns and Mario Ferraro. Obviously, the Sharks were pretty hemmed into their zone for most of this game, though you could say it is slightly more excusable just considering the situation of the second half of the back-to-back. I thought, honestly, that Brent Burns and Mario Ferraro did a very admirable job defensively in this game. Brent Burns had really impressed me, honestly, a lot in this one. Not only did he have some really nice offensive plays, but he also was making some very solid defensive plays as well. And when you're tasked with continuously defending against the likes of Matthews, Tavares, Nylander, Marner, some of the best players, not just on the Leafs, but in the entire league, the fact that you limit them to essentially 0 goals. Yes, Tavares did score, but that was a pretty lucky one at that. The fact that you limit those players to just the 1 goal and a lucky one is extremely impressive for this first pairing for the San Jose Sharks. They've been very, very good. The Sharks defense in general has been doing a good job at locking things down. Even if they are giving up a decent amount of shots, they've managed to keep a lot of it to the perimeter. And Aiden Hill hasn't had to be insane, though I will get to Aiden Hill a bit later in this video. When it comes to Middleton and Erik Karlsson, one thing I do want to mention about Erik Karlsson was just this play in the last couple of minutes of this game. So the Sharks are obviously on their heels. They're trying to defend. They're trying to hold this 1 goal precarious lead. And the puck comes to Erik Karlsson. He's about the middle of his own defensive zone. And you would expect basically every other player, not only on the Sharks, but in the entire league, would probably just either send it out and get an icing or try to get it to center ice, get it down the ice, and go off for a change. But Erik Karlsson decides to go for the offensive play, and it was a dangerous play, but I love the decision that he decides to make here. He ends up on this sort of 2-on-2 rush with Matt Nieto, and he actually almost ends up banking this off the back of Michael Hutchinson, the Leafs goaltender, and getting it into the net for the 5-3 lead, which pretty much would have sealed that game. So it's not as though Erik Karlsson was superb here tonight. I thought he had some really nice offensive looks, and his defensive game wasn't too bad, but I just loved the idea of what he did in that last couple of minutes, and it's kind of driving the play forward instead of just kind of turtling in those last couple of minutes, which we have seen the Sharks do a lot thus far this season. It's been working out. It's not the end of the world that the Sharks are doing that, but I do like that Karlsson kind of went against the grain by making that play. And when it comes to that third pairing, Shemek and Vlasic were kind of similar to their previous game against the Ottawa Senators. They were pretty solid. They weren't really given a ton of ice time at all, really, in this game. I believe Vlasic got less than 12 minutes. I wouldn't even be surprised if, besides games where he was injured, this is probably like the lowest ice time he's ever gotten in his career, or one of the lowest ice times, because Vlasic has always been really a top 4 defenseman, but getting less than 12 minutes is very surprising for him. But this season, it really doesn't come as that much of a surprise, and the same goes with Radim Shemek. So if these two players can still give the Sharks a pretty solid dozen minutes, they would be doing their job, and that's what they did here tonight. Moving on to Aiden Hill as the final player to talk about. Obviously, I mentioned earlier that he didn't have to be superb, but he was maybe one small step below superb at incredible. If you could say incredible is a step below superb, not really sure about the vocabulary there, but Aiden Hill was very, very good here tonight. Even though he actually lets in 3 goals, you really can't blame him on the Tavares goal. Obviously, very, very luck-based there. The Andrej Kasha goal was also a breakaway goal, and while at times in the previous seasons I was blaming Martin Jones even when he would let in these type of breakaway goals, the fact is that Hill has a lot more leeway to let in goals like this compared to Martin Jones, right? Martin Jones, it felt as though anytime the other team would get a break, we saw it end up in the back of the net. So when it came to a breakaway goal, you would say, oh, I hope Jones would have that. But with Aiden Hill, he's been doing so much for the Sharks in his brief period here that when he lets in this breakaway goal, you say, well, it's not really his fault. And when it comes to the first goal of the game as well, this was just the fourth line being a disaster in front of him defensively. Just a huge scramble in front of the net before Spezza put it in. Again, one he didn't really have much of a chance on, but he was huge and integral in shutting down the Leafs' top players. I talked about how Burns and Ferraro were a big part of that, but so was Aiden Hill. And I have have to look no further than just in the last couple of minutes of this game, last 90 seconds of this game. Timo Meyer is skating in the neutral zone, trying to push this puck into the empty net, but never actually manages to get a shot away for whatever reason. The puck then ends up going the other way. Nylander drops off for Austin Matthews, who winds and fires. Matthews probably has one of, if not the best shots in the entire league, up there with the likes of Alex Ovechkin. And yet, Aiden Hill comes up with a massive glove save, freezes the puck, no rebound, and the Sharks end up closing it out. So great game for Aiden Hill. He's been very good for the Sharks through his first 3 games of his, Sharks career, you could say. And just in general, a very hard-fought and solid win for the Sharks tonight. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Sunday, their 4th of 5 games on this big road trip, as they'll take on the Boston Bruins. The Leafs absolutely were a challenge here tonight. The Bruins will be yet another one, and it'll be an afternoon game for the Sharks. So no real rest for the weary in this situation. Class dismissed.